Today we're going to be looking at housing in Pompeii, and we're going to do so through a three-level system, so low, medium, high, so $1 sign up to $3 signs. And we're going to compare that to kind of the options here in Dallas today if you're a student looking for housing. So getting into the $1 sign for Pompeii, the servant or slave class typically would live in-house with those whom they served. But in Rome, they had a different sort of system. So they had these buildings called insulae, which often consisted of 6 to 8 apartment blocks that were built around a staircase and a central courtyard. And these housed poor workers who couldn't afford a traditional domus or house. Landlords would rent out the very bottom spots to shops, much like modern apartment buildings. So to compare that to our options in Dallas today, I've attached a slideshow of an affordable housing unit in Irving, but I'm going to continue talking about how the lower class lived in Pompeii. So much like we see today in large cities, the upper class and elite of Pompeii and Herculaneum would live in villas outside of the town, kind of in like a suburb type area, leaving the lower and middle class workers to live in the actual city centers. Like I said, they didn't have insulae in Pompeii, but they would live inside the city, kind of in whatever housing they could find, or with those whom they served. So moving on to the $2 sign options, we're going to kind of walk through a typical Roman house. I know everyone's probably pretty familiar with this diagram by now. So as far as the typical Pompeii house, they were rectangular in floor plan, and they were centered around the inner courtyard. So all rooms were facing onto it, and they didn't have window openings towards the outside of the house. On the ground level of the house, opening up to the street, they were tabernas or shops. In between them, there would be a main entrance to the house called the vestibulum that leads to an atrium or the formal entrance hall surrounded by smaller rooms. This is where guests and clients would wait for their reception by the patron of the house. The main feature of the atrium was the impluvium or shallow pool, which collected rainwater through the opening in the roof. And here, just for reference, I've attached a virtual tour of an apartment near SMU. I think it's pretty typical of what you see from SMU students. It's really nice, but I'm going to continue talking about the Pompeii house. So while the forum, the baths, the theaters, the amphitheaters, and the inns were the center of the Romans' municipal life, the domus or the house was looked upon as a refuge in the heart of the family's private life. The town plan of Pompeii is characterized by a web of streets which cross one another to form a number of blocks called insulae, and this is not to be confused with the insulae that were the apartments earlier. The houses were built on these insulae, and the area corresponding to one insulae usually comprised of several independent houses, but there were also important residences such as the House of the Faun, which occupied a whole block. Generally speaking, the residential buildings in Pompeii are one-family houses with no upper floor and are completely sealed off from the surroundings. So we can see through context how important ancient houses were to the people. They did pretty much everything here, from rituals and prayers to important business meetings to actual work in the workshops. So moving on to the $3 options, there's a really cool group called the Swedish Pompeii Project. And what they've done is they digitally recreated a wealthy banker's villa in ancient Pompeii and do kind of like a 3D video tour like you'd see in an apartment or a house today. So while this plays, I want you all to take note of the impluvium in the middle of the house as well as the floor decorations, and soon you'll see a statue of Jucundus himself. Like I said, he was a wealthy banker. Here's his money chest. And moving on in the house, you'll see the family altar, which was very well decorated, and it was kind of a centerpiece of like the religious aspect of the house. So moving on, soon you'll see the light intake above the impluvium. This is where the rainwater was actually caught. And moving on from that, you'll see the tabularium, which is the father's office. It's very intricately decorated with wall art and mosaics, kind of to reflect his status and power. Moving on from that, you'll soon see kind of the larger scale mythological paintings in the banquet hall. This is where he would have housed banquets and dinner guests as well as kind of clients for business meetings and things of that nature. So moving on, you can kind of quickly see the exedra that opens up into the peristylum. And just think about this house in general. It was probably for a large extended family with many slaves as opposed to like a single family home like we'd see today. So for the final tour, I'm going to show Park District. It's one of the nicest apartment complexes in Dallas. It's located right by Clyde Warren Park. But as with the previous two categories, I'm going to keep speaking about the upper class living in Pompeii. So like many ancient cities, there was a huge disparity of wealth between the richest and the poorest people. According to the author of Pompeii, The Mysteries of a Buried City, The upper class was so rich that it could spend more on one banquet than a senior imperial bureaucrat would earn in a year. Though inequality existed in most ancient Roman towns, Pompeii appears to have been on the extreme end, possibly because it was a holiday resort. This is a place where rich outsiders would acquire second homes, meanwhile, the poor and working class would be standing in bread lines. They calmed the fears of those on the breadline who risked turning violent by using subsidized prostitution and wine. In addition, the entry to the amphitheater for chariot races and combat between gladiators and animals was free. All in all, Pompeii suffered from some of the same things that we're still dealing with today, and I hope my analysis of the three levels of housing in Pompeii and modern day has shown that.